what plugins should be in your mastering chain. Now, it wouldn't be a bad idea to kind of look around like other engineers' mastering chains and kind of almost look at what they've got and emulate that a little bit if you're using plugins. You know, because at the end of the day, a mastering chain can consist of anything. It really can consist of anything, especially in the plugin world. Now, one thing I will say first of all is try and limit yourself to maybe 10 plugins. Try not to go any further than that, because you could start stacking multiple different plugins on top of each other, and unless you know what you're doing and the purpose of each of these plugins, it can have a bad effect. So now what I would say is one thing you definitely need is obviously EQ, compressor, limiter. Right now, some people say to me, Paul, should I have EQ before my compressor or after my compressor? Well, why can't you have them both? You know, there's benefits to EQ, compressor, EQ, and there's benefits, you know, there's benefits to having an EQ before and after. But in the plugin world, if you just put one before, one after, like if you don't have to use the one after, don't use it. If you don't have to use the one before, which you will need to use it, but if you don't have to use it, don't use it. But there's benefits to both, because at either end, either side of the compression, one EQ can be used to EQ your sound and then apply the compression, push more of a certain frequency into the compressor. Then once it's compressed, the next EQ can be used to lift it out. Now, I like to have, now in my mastering chain, I have the compressor here. But either side of that, I have a stereo EQ I've before, and I have a stereo EQ after. I also have a mid-side EQ before, and I have a mid-side EQ after. Now, the reason for this is stereo EQ is brilliant just as your standard EQ. A mid-side EQ is great if you want to just solo the mid, for instance, and then start working with the mono signal. Get the mono correct, and then switch it to side and turn solo off rather, and then, you know, add some sides. It's good to be able to use mid-side. It's really good to be able to use mid-side. I mean, I've got a really good effective way of working with mid-side. That's why I have one mid-side before compression, one mid-side after, and I also have a stereo EQ which is left and right, because what that gives me is it gives me the best of both worlds. So you can add 4 EQs into your master chain, and some people will go, well, you don't need 4 EQs. Well, no, you could quite easily just use 1 EQ. But why limit yourself? 4 EQs. Now, for me, I've got the PQ, that's in stereo. I've got the Alicia Muse EQ on a Musek. That's in mid-side. I've then got the Vertigo VSE in stereo, and then over here I've got the Thermos V3, which is in mid-side. Now, the Thermos V3 is due to be swapped out for the Buzz REQ 2.2, which is coming any day now. So once that's swapped out, that's going to be my new mid-side EQ. Now, what I've got there is 4 exceptional EQs that all have their own unique purpose either side of that compression. And there's no reason you can't do that in the plugin world. Because the one good thing about plugins is if you're not using emulation, let's say for argument's sake you're using FabFilter, Pro Q3, you can have multiple bands which can do the stereo and can do the mid-side. So you can kind of roll mid-side and stereo left and right into one plugin. I would personally say choose different plugins, because different plugins emulating different pieces of hardware, they'll sound different and they'll have their own unique purpose. Find out which one works best for you with mid-side, which one works best for you in left and right. The other things you want to put into a mastering chain, you want to have an EQ that has good filter as well, because at some points you will want to roll off the, let's say, up to about, I don't know, 20, 30 hertz. You'll want to roll that off sometimes in some tracks. That you'll want to have. The other things are a good de-esser. You want a good de-esser. Now, the one I always use and the one I always recommend is Soothe 2. And the reason for that is that it will, because it's AI, and it will adapt to the sound as you go. It's not just reacting to a threshold, it's reacting to the whole frequency range that you set. And it's incredible, to be honest. Now for me, I have one before I come out the box, and then I have one when I go back into the box, and all that's doing is it's just catching those peaks before I head out the box, and then it's catching all the peaks if need be when I come in the box, just removing any harsh frequencies. What else do we want in a mastering chain? A limiter. Now, limiting. Lots of people will favour going back into the box to do limiting. I like to come back in the box and do limiting using FabFilter Pro L2. That's my preferred limiter. I've also got the Lowell look ahead limiter, which I use out the box, and that's my analog EQ, analog limiter. Now, a limiter massively important when it comes to getting your correct loudness, and even with one of the best kind of analog limiters money can buy, I will still come in the box and I'll set my true peak using L2, for instance. So it's still, L2 is massively important. I think it's one of the best limiters there are. And I've compared all these different limiters, and you know, they are relatively similar, but L2 is one of the best. So a limiter is going to be something that you'll really want. Now, another thing is stereo widening. Now, stereo widening, you've got a few tools out there for stereo widening, which are just about all about the stereo image. Now, you have options here. What you can do is you can use a mid-side EQ to achieve this stereo width. And in some cases, it's better because you're kind of defining the curve of that stereo width. Although there are other stereo imaging plugins which will almost, some of them do almost create like a double signal, a Doppling effect, and it can, in the mastering sense, you can get this kind of double tap on the kick. I personally don't like to use that sort of kind of widening. I much prefer things like down here. I use the Portico 2. Now, I have not experienced anything like that in the plugin world. It's more to do with second and third harmonics on kind of the Silk Red. So the third harmonics on the Silk Red, turning that up, and you just get this sweet width. Yeah, I've not experienced much in the way of decent stereo imaging in the box. You've got the K stereo, which is really good, but that's one that does, when you turn the ambience up, that's one that does give you this double effect on the kick. And it's, for me, it's not good to do that sort of stereo widening where you kind of get the mono signal, what's in the center information, and kind of getting the signal and crossing it over, causing that sort of effect. I'm not keen on that, causing phase and things, especially in the mastering chain. So I'm more keen on if for instance I was working the box, I would be more inclined to use mid side and just enhancing the width using the sides, basically turning the sides up, pinpointing where I want to bring up and actually increase the sides, rather than using this kind of spreading effect, which I'm not massively keen on. The other things you'll want to have in a mastering chain are a good envelope. Now, Spiff, that is a good transient designer. I use Spiff in the box, and I use the Elysia envelope here as my transient designer in my analog chain. A transient designer, what it's going to do for you is it's just going to, well, obviously bring out the peaks and kind of bring out the transients a bit more. Give your song a bit more punch. That's why I like to use Spiff, because Spiff almost adapts across a whole range or wherever you want to set it, and it will react really well. And it is, if I'm honest, it's better. I find it better than the outboard transient designs because it works in a more of an efficient way. Other things that you might want to put into a mastering chain. Now, one to think about is what I've got here, which is on the Vertigo VSE, and that is air. Now, the Marg EQ4M or the Marg EQ4 that you would have in the box has the air. Now, I've not really experienced a good in the box air plugin like that just gives you that bright top end of like 40 hertz or something. I've not experienced one in the box, but I've experienced a lot of them out the box. I love the VSE for it. It's got this really rich top end to it. Now, another thing that you can consider in the mastering chain is something like an aural exciter. Now, an exciter is good because what it's going to do is it's not just increasing the volume and like an EQ in the top end, it's adding harmonic information up the top. They're always good to have. I use one on every bus in the box when I'm mixing, and that is because it's one tool that can add that information that isn't already there, and it is a very, very good tool to have. It's also handy to have on your way out of the box. I've got one again. I've got one as I come out the box. I've got one as I come in the box, and it's I mean, I'd say 8 in 10 times it's not used. 2 out of 10 times it will get used, and it is just used as a tool to basically, if the client's mix is very, very dull, the aural exciter will just enhance all that top end. So what I'm trying to achieve before I come out the box into this mastering chain is that the mix is up to a standard that I want it at to go through the mastering chain. So I do anything like adding a bit of aural excitement, top end, just adding some more harmonics into the top end, just so that what comes out the box sounds better, and it's not dull anymore. It's nice, bright, and alive, and that's what an aural exciter will do for your chain. Let's have a think. Is there anything else that can go into a mastering chain? Now, another one worth having in your mastering chain is dynamic EQ. Now, dynamic EQ, I've got here to left of me, I've got the Golly dynamic EQ shelving EQ. And it is an incredible EQ, and I have it at the end of my chain. And what it's used for is when I get to the end of my chain, if I need to control my top end or I need to control my bottom end, I need to control the bass, just basically if the bass is kind of peaking out a little bit and I want to just control those peaks, I use the dynamic EQ. And the reason I like to use dynamic EQ is because it's unlike compression. Compression is compressing that sound, whereas dynamic EQ is working with gain and just reducing that sound and making sure that it's controlled. That's what's good about dynamic EQ. You've got plugins like the Kirchhoff EQ, you've got the FabFilter Pro Q3, you've also got an Oxford dynamic EQ. Dynamic EQ is found in some digital EQs, plugin EQs, and it's very, very, very handy to have an EQ that has dynamic EQ, because it's something that it's by no means is it essential, but it's something that's very, very handy to have because it has a different purpose that compression doesn't. Another one that's handy to have at the very start of your chain, and I use the Wes Audio NG bus compressor for this, is basically bus compression. Now, the first thing your mix hits is the bus comp, and the bus comp basically does that age-old thing of what the SSLG bus compressor is kind of designed to do, and that is the bus compression. So next door we use the Alicia alpha compressor, and that is used as our bus comp to basically, I mean, that's a high-end bus comp, to be honest. The Wes Audio as well, these compressors basically what they're doing is they're controlling that mix, they're gluing that mix together, they're pulling it all together, and they're giving you, they're basically hitting that bus comp as the first plugin or the first piece of hardware that you hit, and gluing that mix together so that what goes on from there is a lovely glued mix. That I consider, because I actually have it as you know, the Wes Audio stuff is a plugin as well as a piece of hardware, so it's plugin controlling hardware. I almost think of it as I'm still in the box. it's not even a part of the analog chain. So that is used to basically control and compress, get that mix glued together, so that what I'm trying to achieve when I come out the box is that what's hitting this mastering chain is perfect. It's the perfect mastering chain, perfect sound to go into this chain.